Firstly, the picture on the thumbnail is a stock photo. Only a small number of people actually know what Dr. A looks like. For those who followed the Lucy Letby case last year, a theory that was put forward by the prosecution and picked up by some casual observers of the case was that Lucy Letby sabotaged babies because she was desperate to see a doctor who would rush to the nursery on presumably hearing alarms or calls for help. Even if you think Lucy Letby is guilty, this is almost certainly an idea that is beyond sanity or comprehension for reasons I will get into later. A potentially credible way of viewing this Dr. A is that he is a peripheral figure to the devious actions of Letby. An alternative explanation that is more relevant to public interest is that he is perhaps an individual who intentionally misrepresented evidence and the nature of his relationship with Letby in order to essentially bury his mistress and try to minimize any damage to his family relationship. The reason I say this is relevant to the public interest is because forthcoming is a Thirlwall inquiry which is designed to process the events at the Countess of Chester Hospital from the summer of 2015 to the summer of 2016 and suggest areas for improvement to prevent such tragic outcomes occurring again. If this anonymous Dr. A did misrepresent things at the court case, then he may also, in a way, have confused the public inquiry. If you have paid attention to the recent media coverage of the Letby case, then you will notice that the medical and statistical evidence which implicated Letby in some or all of the cases is now being questioned. Furthermore, questions about infection control at the Countess of Chester Hospital are being raised, with the Daily Telegraph running a story saying that the bacteria Pseudomonas aeruginosa was detected on the unit during the time of Letby's alleged killing spree, and they also quoted credentialed microbiologist David Livermore describing the ways in which that bacteria is a hazard. To give a bit of background about Dr. A, at the time of the incidents, he was a married registrar 17 years older than Letby. He applied for a court order barring the naming of him prior to Lucy Letby's first trial, saying that at the time his son was doing his GCSEs and his daughter A-levels, and both were unaware of his involvement in the case. This meant that he gave evidence from behind a screen, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think even the jury couldn't see him. It is not completely clear as to whether or not Letby's relationship with this doctor was intimate or platonic. One thing that is sure is that there is a marked contrast between the tone of their text messages at the time of the incidents and how the anonymous doctor described their relationship in court. I'm going to go through this with a before and after divide. The first couple of text messages I'm going to look at are from the Chester Standard play-by-play court reports from Friday 31st of March 2023 and refer to text messages read out in court under 12:27 p.m. in the Chester Standard. Letby messages a doctor, the doctor being discussed at 10:48 p.m. Quote, "Do I need to be worried about what Dr. Gibbs was asking?" The doctor, who is labelled as response, replies, "No. He was asking to make sure that normal procedures were being carried out." There are a couple of different ways of taking this exchange. If you view Letby as a victim and a scapegoat, you would look at this and think, did she have anything to worry about? Well, she ended up being convicted as the worst child serial killer in British history. At this point, the doctor is maybe misleading her that she had more to worry about than she may have possibly imagined. The pro-doctor argument is that Letby was keeping her misdeeds secret and he was unaware. Same timestamp further down the text exchange, quote, "The doctor replies he would be willing to provide a statement to back Letby up in any event," end quote. This point, I think, is particularly significant because when the time comes at the court case to provide a statement, he doesn't give one. Regardless of what standing he and Letby may have been on at that stage, he should be expected to give an honest medical opinion. He adds, quote, "It's why I'm so happy to work with you. You don't flap, you give perfectly sensible suggestions. No more doubt, it's not you, it's the babies. Then Letby adds, quote, so relieved that it's you who has been here throughout, end quote. Remember, this is from the Chester Standard, Friday, March 31st, 2023, and you can find a link to it in the description. 12:28 p.m. The doctor replies, it's true. You're one of the few nurses across the region that I would trust with my own children. Letby responds, don't know what to say, thank you. The doctor replies, self-doubt finished. Letby says, I think so, thank you. I'm not going to go through these texts too much, but the following is from Chester Standard Court Reports, 8th March 2023, just above the 12:32 timestamp. Letby adds she had forgotten her sandwich and jokingly asks if she can go home. The doctor replies there's a cheese roll going spare, then offers to get her something for lunch. So remember, the suggested motive last year was that she was sabotaging babies just to get his attention. Yet here he's openly offering to get her lunch. At this stage, Letby actually seems to give him the brush off a bit by joking tapas and then saying, it's okay thanks, I've got a few bits with me. The next message exchanges are between Letby and a nursing colleague. They are from the Chester Standard Court Reports, 2nd of March 2023, link in the description. Just below the 11:26 timestamp, the conversation continues about discussion of other babies, and Letby messages her colleague. Had strange message from Dr. A earlier. Her colleague responds, did you, saying what? The messages continue, there's some banter between the two. Remember, you can pause this if you want to fully take in the exchanges between the two of them. Towards the end of the exchange, Letby says, certainly don't fancy him, haha, just nice guy. So you can make from that what you will. These next text exchanges are from June 2016, although they are taken from the Chester Standard Court Report, Monday 20th of March 2023. This is just after Letby fainted. The doctor said, quote, you could have bleeped me, I'm almost a responsible adult, end quote. Remember, this is a man who is 17 years older than Letby. He then says, quote, do you need a lift home? The timeline jumps a bit too. After she was dropped off by the doctor at her home address, Letby messages him, quote, thank you for the lift and for talking to A&E, end quote, which is apparently a reference to the fact that he had pulled some strings for her to get seen first at A&E. In the next text exchange, he messages Letby after midnight and says, quote, what are you doing? I can't concentrate on anything. It's quite an unusual phrasing to be using after midnight. Most people probably wouldn't expect him to be working at this time. I wonder if perhaps he was thinking of coming out with some kind of corny line, or perhaps something more explicitly direct, only to question himself at the last minute and come out with something more awkward. One can only speculate on his intentions, but regardless, Letby responds, wanting to cry, and uses a cry emoji apparently. The doctor then says he did in the car, and he must have looked a right mess when he got in. Letby replies, I keep thinking of them, child O and child P, both in the cot together, so peaceful, yet beyond words how awful it is. So sad, the family thanked me when I took child P and dressed. I don't know, age doesn't make it any easier or harder, but such a lot to go through at a young age. The next part is going to jump forward a bit in terms of the court case, although it's chronological in terms of the relationship between Lucy Letby and this Dr. A character. It seems that once Lucy Letby was removed from duty in summer 2016 and she was moved to an admin position, her relationship with Dr. A jumped up a notch. Towards the end of Prosecutor Nick Johnson's cross-examination of Lucy Letby, he showed a social timeline to the court. This can be established by looking at the Chester Standard Court Report, 9th July 2023, where they say there were meetings between Letby and the doctor in Hartford, Cheshire Oaks, and London between May to June 2017. Specifically, Letby admitted they went for coffee at Starbucks. They went for a meal at an American-themed restaurant. They went shopping at Cheshire Oaks, and they went on a trip to London together. Quite what Dr. A would have said to his wife and kids whilst he was going out for a meal or on a trip to London with a younger nurse, I have no idea. Later on in the cross-examination, Letby apparently admitted to having a boyfriend, though she didn't say who specifically this was. Something which also came out in court and refers to this intervening period where Letby was taken off the wards and placed on admin duty before the court case began. Written on this blue note and discussed in court according to the Chester Standard on 17th of April 2023. Quote, "Please help me." Then it has Dr. A's name in brackets. "Love, please help me." Dr. A's name in brackets again. Then it says, "You are my best friend." And Dr. A's name in brackets once more. So for the time being, I think I've covered the most significant elements of Letby and Dr. A's pre-trial relationship that came out in the court. Now to refer back to the prosecution idea that Letby intentionally sabotaged babies just to get Dr. A to come running. In terms of the court case, this idea was weakly seized on after the testimony of Anthony Yuko, who suggested that Letby tried to unnecessarily involve Dr. A at certain moments. This is something which I can find believable. Considering that Dr. A seems to have been trying to charm Letby, I don't find it hard to imagine she may have wanted to involve him in a way that verged on the unprofessional. However, to take that as an indicator that she would sabotage babies to get him to come running when he's asking her on lunch dates and she's knocking him back seems a massive stretch. It further beggars belief when you consider he only becomes involved in the court case around the time of baby L, and I think he started to work on the unit around February 2016, which is about 8 months in to Letby's alleged killing spree. Backing up a stage to before the court case, I suspect this attention-seeking motive may have been suggested by prosecution medical analyst Dewey Evans in conversations with police and prosecutors. The reason for this is because Evans has a controversial background over diagnosing a mental illness called Munchausen's by proxy. Exploring this background would likely take up a video in itself, but Brian Garish is a writer for a magazine UK column who in the past has been part of campaigns to have Evans struck off the medical register due to his diagnosis of this mental illness.
And Dr. Evans, who we're very interested in, shame he's not here tonight, he says there's nothing wrong with Bonnie, but there is something wrong with her mother.
I can't say I'm an expert in Munchausen's, but Brian Garish describes it like this.
They think that if you try and take your child for treatment, you're mentally ill.
As I understand it, Munchausen's by proxy is a real mental illness, but a very rare one. The parent or caregiver either makes a child fake illness or induces illness in order to draw attention to themselves. The grey area is if the child has a rare condition or a condition that the doctor fails to recognise. Protestations around the illness could potentially look like attention-seeking. Critics of Evans say that it wasn't this mother who had Munchausen's, but rather the daughter in fact had a rare condition called Zollinger's syndrome.
She was in pain, she was in constant pain, and yet they couldn't get a diagnosis and they couldn't get a treatment.
Dewey Evans, though, was convinced the problems for Bonnie Linda Lewis were all just attention-seeking, and he got busy sending letters to social services.
From Dr. Dewey Evans. He says, "I feel there are now very strong grounds for suggesting that Bonnie's health is being avoidably impaired by her family."
The story goes that Bonnie Linda Lewis was eventually separated from her mother, but when she did, the pain from her underlying condition didn't stop.
But it was kidnapping by the state.
The term Munchausen's has been associated with Letby, but I don't think the evidence supports that she would go to extreme lengths to get Dr. A's attention. So now, looking more directly at what actually happened in the courtroom, one of the most highly publicised moments from the Letby trial. Chester Standard, 16th of February 2023. Headline: Lucy Letby breaks down as doctor gives evidence at trial. Reading through it, Lucy Letby, 33, abruptly left her seat in the middle of the glass-panelled dock at Manchester Crown Court on Thursday, February 16th, as the medic, who cannot be identified for legal reasons. I think a key detail that gets missed here, and is missed in other articles, is that he was called to the witness stand by prosecutor Philip Asbury. Remember, this is the guy who said he would trust Letby with his own children, and they would write her a statement if she ever needed it, and now he's called as a prosecution witness. I think anyone who is on a trial where they may end up in jail for the rest of their life would be upset at such an overt stab in the back. What I think is initially extra damaging to Letby, although I think his testimony is not controversial on this particular day, is that he plays a part in the insulin thread, which has been said was the part of the prosecution case which bound everything together. Reading through the Chester Standard report, the youngster's blood sugar levels were decreasing during the night shift and were, quote, lower than what I would have wanted, he said. Asked by prosecutor Philip Asbury why it was necessary to stop the levels falling, the doctor said, quote, because low blood glucose levels in a baby can cause seizures. It's damaging to a baby if it falls to a much lower level, then it can cause liver damage and brain injury. I'm not going to go over the insulin results in depth here, but the reliability of the insulin tests in the Letby case have been questioned by Alan Jones, a forensic toxicologist.
I took a closer look at the evidence in that case, and I didn't like what I found.
As I understand it, the argument that Professor Jones makes is that the immunoassay test used sometimes just generally produces anomalous results.
You need more robust methods of analysis.
Joseph Woolstorff, a professor at Harvard Medical School who specializes in pediatric hypoglycemia, has also suggested a testing irregularity in terms of the insulin tests in the Letby case. A Freedom of Information Act request looking at insulin immunoassay test results at Liverpool hospitals over the period of 2020 to 2023 shows that most results are in the normal range, yet there are a number of strange results similar to the reading in the Letby case, and as far as I'm aware, no one has been charged over these results. The next time that Dr. A is called to testify is in the case of child N, and this is more significant because there is an allegation he made a mistake in terms of tube intubation by the defence, with the alternative allegation being put forward by the prosecution that Letby used a superficially flimsy nasogastric tube to bludgeon a neonate in brutal fashion. So now, looking at the prosecution theory for what happened to child N, the following is taken from the Lucy Letby Tattle Life Wiki and refers to testimony in court Tuesday 7th of March 2023. Medical expert Dr. Dowie Evans said the blood seen in child N's stomach had originated there, caused not from intubation attempts, but, quote, instead some preceding trauma. He suggested that, quote, thrusting a nasogastric tube into the back of the throat might be the mechanism used to inflict injury. Remember, this idea of a nasogastric tube attack comes from Dr. Dewey Evans. This is a doctor with a controversial background involving allegations he unnecessarily broke up families. Now looking at Dr. A's testimony from March 6th, 2023, looking at the play-by-play tweets from BBC reporter Dan O'Donoghue. The medic tells the court that he recalls child N as he had trouble trying to intubate him. He says, quote, which for me is not a frequent occurrence, end quote. You could say the interjection implying that he rarely is unsuccessful with tube intubations is both unnecessary and immodest. It's not unusual for this type of tube intubation to be unsuccessful. In the next Dr. A exchange of significance, going by Dan O'Donoghue's Twitter, Myers is asking the doctor when he saw blood in child N's throat. He said, as in Dr. A quote, "I believe blood was there at insertion attempt number 1. So here he's deflecting attention away from potentially his failed tube intubation and effectively endorsing the prosecution theory put forward by Dr. Evans that someone else caused the issue. However, Dr. A appears to get caught out. Mr. Myers has just quoted the doctor's police statement from 2018. In this, he says he was not sure if the bleeding was his fault due to his attempts to move the tongue with a medical implement to intubate. Personally, I can't think of a good reason why his memory would become clearer with time. Cynical explanations would be that a scapegoat has now been established, or perhaps he thought it would carry more favour with his wife to suggest the woman at work he had been flirting with meant nothing to him. I would like to ask the viewer to compare the plausibility of a nasogastric tube attack versus a failed tube intubation. If you work with nasogastric tubes, then please let me know in the comments. When you look at a nasogastric tube, they have a blunt end, which is usually inserted through the nose and reaches into the stomach. From there, they can be used to feed babies with formula and can also have other uses, such as aspirating or withdrawing fluid from the stomach. If you compare that with a tube intubation, firstly, it involves a metal laryngoscope, which looks like quite an intimidating piece of equipment. Secondarily, this laryngoscope is used to manipulate the epiglottis at the back of the throat, which is quite a small flap of cartilage. It seems to me that something could easily go wrong when trying to locate and move this small piece of cartilage, and the laryngoscope could instead catch the back of the throat. Picking out a quote from this study, which made its way into the British Medical Journal. Quote, "What factors affect the success rate of the first attempt at endotracheal tube intubation in emergency departments?" Highlighted in the conclusion, quote, "The overall endotracheal tube intubation success rate on first attempt was 80.1%. So you can see that failed tube intubations are something that generally happens. Something to also consider is the stakes involved here. For Dr. A, it's a failed tube intubation. He may not want to put it out there publicly, but then he's been given anonymity, presumably to make it easier to admit to this kind of incident, for which other doctors are unlikely to judge him harshly. For Lucy Letby, by contrast, the charge is attempted murder. It should be noted, in total, child N has 7 failed intubations before a doctor from Arrow Park Hospital arrives and successfully intubates the baby on the first attempt. Failed tube intubations have been associated with poorer patient outcomes, as the baby's oxygen supply is suboptimal during the procedure. Looking again at BBC reporter Dan O'Donoghue's play-by-play tweets on March 6, 2023, there is another thing which Dr. A says which I think is probably deceptive. Quote, "The doctor said this made him think the baby boy had an infection. A septic screen of his bloods was then ordered. He tells the court that results ruled out infection as a cause." Dr. A mentions a septic screen. Sepsis, for those who don't know, is a process where the body is infected, most commonly in the blood, by a bacteria, fungus, or virus that is so overwhelming it causes the body's internal organs to become dysfunctional, which usually results in severe illness or death. The issue I have with what Dr. A is saying here is how absolutist he is with the statement that infection has been ruled out. The type of test they make mention of in the Letby case is a blood culture where a blood sample is taken to a laboratory and bacteria or fungi are encouraged to grow. The problem here is that there may be several reasons why the bacteria are able to grow and replicate better in the human body than they do in a laboratory environment. So I think just because the test has come back negative, you can't 100% say the infection has been ruled out. Looking at this review, study title, Comparison of Clinical Outcomes Between Culture Positive and Culture Negative Sepsis and Septic Shock Patients, a meta-analysis. Picking out this statement underlined, previous studies have reported that culture negative cases comprise 28 to 49% of all sepsis patients. There may have been a couple of other tests the hospital used as well, but I don't think they would have been without reliability issues either. One person who has seen the full case notes for these babies is Letby's medical defense witness, Dr. Mike Hall. He wasn't called at the first trial, which many people find a head scratcher, though he has been interviewed by Private Eye's medical correspondent Phil Hammond, to whom he relayed this information.
He thinks the babies were actually far sicker than the prosecution portrayed. So
I think the text messages Dr. A was sending at the time to Letby likely more closely reveal what he was really thinking than what he said during the court case. The following is taken from the Chester Standard play-by-play court report, and Dr. A is referred to as R. No more doubt, it's not you, it's the babies. I don't know what happened to child O and child P, and accept that the post-mortem may not give any useful answers. I do wonder if they may have had adenovirus. It's terrible in neonates/perinates. Then he says child Q is different. I wouldn't be surprised if his BC, referring to the blood culture test they are using, comes back positive. One final piece of medical evidence that suggests Dr. A was doing what he could to make sure of a conviction. BBC court reporter Dan O'Donoghue's tweets on April 5th, 2023. In the messages, the doctor, as in Dr. A, tells Miss Letby that another doctor on the unit was concerned that child O's liver injury may have been caused by her chest compressions. Child O, for those who don't know, had an autopsy performed by respected pathologist George Kakai, who said in his report that the child had a liver injury sustained due to vigorous CPR. There's a text message trail that shows that this doctor discussed it with Dr. A, suggesting the text message exchange, this discussion of the CPR, went on for 20 minutes. During the court case, Dr. A's memory suddenly goes blank, which instead leans into the prosecution theory that the injury was caused by Letby. The final article I'm going to use as a source for this video is the one pictured. Rare anonymity orders on Lucy Letby witnesses will have chilling effect on future cases. This article contains some unique information which wasn't quoted by court reporters. I think this is because court reporters either didn't write it down in time, or perhaps because his lawyer got something arranged. Quote, Dr. A, who is married, told the court he had been the subject of unrequited affection from Letby, and said his wife had also been targeted by her on social media. So in conclusion, I don't think the text message activity supports some kind of attention-seeking motive from Letby. If you look around at the comments on social media about this case, many true crime style fans have suggested Dr. A was dishonest about the nature of his relationship with Letby. What doesn't get discussed as much is he was probably also subtly dishonest about the nature of the medical evidence at the trial. If there is a retrial for Letby, I'm not sure there's a reason that lifting the court order barring his identity is essential, but I don't think being anonymous really did anything to improve the quality of his evidence.